In this session, we're going to have a look at breaches or openings that a spirit could come into us through. But first of all, let's talk about the spiritual realm in general, which is all around us all of the time. And many years ago, as a young man, I was wrestling with this concept. And I recalled when, as a child, we would go camping in what's known as a canvas tent, which is quite a thick material, and it's excellent material at keeping out the rain and the weather. The only problem that it had was that to some extent the material seemed to soak up the water to the point of saturation, or where it couldn't hold any more water as a part of its ability to have the rain run off. So if you're in the tent and once it had reached this saturation point, if you touched the material anywhere when it was raining, that was now a place where it leaked. And the spiritual realm is very much like this. We're always surrounded by spiritual elements, and wherever we touch into it, that is where we have given it access to leak into our environment, then that is where we will receive whatever it is that we've touched into. So let me suggest some areas where we may create openings, and if there is demonization that goes with it, then the following list of examples could all be the names of demons. So remember, we said we could address them as you spirit that's been involved in holding Fred into rebellious behaviour. Now this assumes that we've dealt with the injustice beliefs and so forth that are in his heart that have given place to this rebellious spirit, or we're doing it simultaneously, seeking to get the truth in his heart, and then also as that's happening, we may be addressing the spirit. All right, so these are some examples or areas, samples, if you like, of the human person that spirits may influence or affect. So we can have what we call emotional breaches, and this would include things like fear events and places that have caused bitterness as a reaction, or rejection that's produced a negative feeling in us, or perhaps inferiority and so forth. These could all potentially, but not always, be breaches where we receive a spirit. The next area is mental problems, and this could include doubt or unbelief, perhaps fantasy, withdrawal, even insanity in an extreme, and sometimes that's the compound effect of a number of these different problems, again coming from heart beliefs. Although they're called mental problems, they're actually very often heart belief problems that then affect our minds with confusion and so forth. Also, there's moral issues, so this could include things like pornography or fornication, adultery, lying, theft, things like that. Then there's relational disharmony. So these are all areas, if you like, that could include things like mockery, criticism, slander, judgment, religion, even rejection, that is in you rejecting other people. Then there are spiritual alliances, yet another area. So that this could include the occult, false religion, witchcraft, things like that, where we align ourselves with spirits other than the Spirit of God. And then finally, physical bondage is an area our actual bodies can be affected in some form or another by a spirit, and this could include things like addictions, where the chemical cycle that's happening in us is held in place by a spirit, or lusts of various kinds, perhaps going into altered states with drugs or something now becomes a physical chemical issue, violence, infirmity, all of these things. So these are all potential areas of exposure to the spirit realm that if we touch into it, or there is an opening, then it's a possibility that something could enter. And you'll note that virtually all of these are tied to thoughts that are coming from beliefs that then sometimes lead to decisions which are sin, and they precipitate and present in these different decisions, but they begin as heart beliefs. So this should kind of recenter us on the need for truth at every level of our being, so we can make good and protective choices, discerning what spirit we're actually aligning with. So the lesson here is to know what kind of demon or evil spirit we're dealing with. We simply look at its function and the area of the stronghold in the person. All right, so let's move on to our investigation of breaches, and I want to use a word here, integrity. And most probably when you hear the word integrity, you think of perhaps a businessman or somebody like that, or a banker who conducts their dealings in an upright and trustworthy manner. But the word integrity actually means the state of being entire or whole. So as an example, if you could imagine your skin as a God-given barrier to protect you from the elements that are out there, as well as various sorts of bacteria and diseases. Now, while my skin holds its unbroken integrity and remains whole, we could pour, for example, HIV/AIDS on it, or hepatitis B virus over my arm, and I would not be harmed. But if you created a small cut or opening in the wholeness or integrity of my skin, then I would become infected and get sick. So we've already mentioned that the word for being saved is sozo, and that a part of the meaning of that word includes to deliver or protect, which is what happens we have these protective things around us, if you like, which can be our mental wholeness, our emotional wholeness, or our physical wholeness. But it also means coming to wholeness. And so the more whole we are in regards to the truth about God, about ourselves, about how to deal with others, and even about the spiritual world that's around us that we have, then the more delivered we are. And in fact, it's our best protection against possible infection from the spirit realm. And this is why children are the most vulnerable, because they have the least amount of truth and understanding. So they need our spiritual protection, which also is practical. When a thing's spiritual, everything is always spiritual. It's a spiritual world. So they need, in a practical way, instruction from us to bring them up in the counsel of the Lord, and emotional protection in helping them to believe the right things and so forth. All right, now the most whole person, when we think about it, who ever walked the earth, was Jesus. He wasn't strange. He didn't say very spiritual things. He was just whole and complete. And he stated that because the devil had no wrong beliefs in him regarding himself, so his identity, how the Father saw him, knowing that Father was pleased with him, or why people were even being used, for that matter, as instruments of the devil because of their beliefs to try to get to him. None of those things surprised him. He was whole in his knowledge and thinking and believing. And because of the level of truth that he had inside, he was without sin. So the result was that the devil couldn't touch him. And wholeness is our best protection, and our goal is to be conformed to his likeness. In John 14:30, remember we see him saying, I will no longer talk with you much, for the ruler of this world is coming, and he has nothing in me. So when we have a breach or a break or something in our spiritual or emotional integrity or our mental state, it's a potential entry point for a spirit. This could be something such as a time of extreme fear or trauma. We talked before about pornography. I even believe that that's like a shock or a trauma when a young boy, and which is commonly happens nowadays, is shown something like pornography on a smartphone. If he knows nothing of these things, it's a trauma for him, and so the images are very deeply burnt into him. That's not saying he will become demonized, but it may entice him to look more, and then he may become demonized. All right, could be a time of abuse where our understanding of the situation is overwhelmed and we're out of control, or we're deeply emotionally upset. It could also be a time where we're on drugs or drunk, and our normal resistance and our mental integrity is weakened, and now we potentially do something sinful that we would not normally do. Really, when you think about spirits, we see people with drug addicts, and they have paranoia and imagine things that are going on that aren't going on. Well, when you take these what they call recreation drugs, what are you doing? You're creating an altered state, or in other words, you're going into unreality because you don't like the reality that you're in. So really, the spirit behind that is often a spirit of unreality, and that's what produces the paranoia once it's in place. All right, so in a ministry setting, we're aware of possible breaches in our wholeness of some kind that may have given place to a spirit. And we're looking actually to repair the breach in the walls of the human personality so that the people have normal resistance to these spiritual inroads. And so that's a part of our job. And we see in Isaiah 58, it says, if you extend your soul to the hungry and satisfy the afflicted souls, that is the person that's hurt, helping them restore the beliefs inside, then your light shall dawn in the darkness, and your darkness shall be as noonday. So in that process, and then if we jump forward a little bit to verse 12, it says, those from among you shall build the old waste places. You shall raise up the foundations of many generations, and you shall be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of streets to dwell in. So the repairer of the breach, we're talking about breaches in the human personality, which has walls, and walls were intended to keep the bad things out and protect the good things. Remember, we said the spirit realm's around us all the time. You could go and touch into it if you wanted to. You could go looking for bad things and connect with that, create an opening into that. But our normal walls that give us common sense to not do those things are our mental and emotional state. For example, a healthy body will include a good immune system that can deal with all of the attacks that may come. In much the same way, a healthy soul, mind, will, and emotions will have its own protection. Okay, some spiritual and emotional building materials that are used to strengthen the walls of the human personality and keep the temple of the Holy Spirit in good condition. Such items as love, acceptance, grace, truth, value. People need to be valued. God values them, treat them as significant. Encouragement as nourishment to the soul, giving them worth. Freedom, in other words, respecting their sovereignty, releasing them into their own decisions. Respect, honor, forgiveness, kindness, protection, and so on. You can think of your own positive things that you can do for people that actually help to build up their person. So we children of God have been given the privilege of working with the Holy Spirit to help repair people's lives and deal with the breach, and then for Him to receive the glory for that which He does in them. And this is well illustrated in the beautiful typology from Isaiah 61 verse 3 and 4 that we'll bring up on the screen as we go along here. All right, so from a breach in integrity or an opening in our wholeness, we move to integration. So once something has come in through our lack of wholeness in some area, then it becomes integrated with us. So we go from integrity to integration. Now, many people are unaware of or unable to discern the spiritual dynamics that may be at work inside of them. Oftentimes, they leave getting help until it's too late, and they have a trail of hurt children and broken relationships and multiple marriages or whatever, or perhaps even end up with some sort of a physical problem because they leave the issue a long time. And remember many years ago I developed a low-grade toothache, and it didn't bother me very much, but it was a slowly rotting tooth. And as with most people, I didn't particularly like going to the dentist, so I put up with it for quite a long time, putting off getting around to getting it fixed. But eventually it did get a bit worse, and I did go to get it taken out. Now I recall a very irate dentist, and it was a hot day, and he was sweating as he was wrestling for a long time with his pliers to try to get this rotten tooth out. And as he went along, he would get increasingly frustrated as pieces of it broke off as he sort of struggled to remove it. And as he wiggled the very last piece loose, I remember him saying, between pushing backwards and forwards, he said, "Don't ever leave it this long again." And very often we minister to people who have a trail of relational or other damage behind them, and you can't help but thinking that if they'd done something much sooner, their lives and the lives of those around them would have been much more abundant. But sadly, the modern church is often either not equipped to help them or prioritizes other activities, whereas Jesus spent His time healing people, healing the broken hearts, setting them free from their areas of captivity, and everything else proceeded from that. But the lesson here is our best defense against spiritual inroads is wholeness. And if we don't get our issues dealt with, others around us will probably suffer some sort of consequence. The devil loves to work in the darkness. In Australia, we have termites, or as we know them, we call them white ants. And we used to live in an area where they were actually highly active and common, and they're not unlike the demonic realm in the sense that they work in the dark, and they hate being exposed to the light because they will die. And once we owned a very old house that had an infestation of them, and very often the first sign that they were there was a hole in your skirting or architrave, that is the framing around your doors or windows, where when you pushed on it, your finger would go right through. But by the time it came to that stage, the damage was done and your framing was usually extensively damaged. Now, the only way to avoid this was through regular examinations from an expert who was equipped to detect them and knew the signs to look for. So I don't say lightly today that there's evidence everywhere in the body of Christ that it's badly infested with beings working in the dark, and we need to train up an army of helpers to help her get into an irresistible condition to attract a hurting world. So God, of course, can resolve all issues if he's given the opportunity to do so, but very often, if the church is unequipped, we don't do that. It's interesting, the early church in 1 Corinthians, you're going to find it talks about people who were had various problems, but he says that's what some of you were. So apparently they were getting people set free. Okay, well, once a spirit has breached the integrity of a person through some means and come inside, it will entwine itself with your personality in that particular area. Now, from experience, I would say that a demon is limited to work in you in the area or place that's given it ground. And by this I mean that a spirit that causes you to be violent has no ability to lead you into, say, false religion or lustful behaviour. Its function and area of influence is limited to that which has given it access and a place. And if the member of your personality that is given to the devil is, for example, your sexuality through choosing to view pornography, then it follows that lust will be the stronghold outcome rather than, say, for example, bitterness or some other thing. And in Romans 6:12 we read, "Therefore do not let sin reign in your mortal body, that you should obey its lusts, its strong desires. And do not present your members," this is the parts of your personality and body, "as instruments of unrighteousness to sin, but present yourselves to God as being alive from the dead, and your members as instruments of righteousness to God." So although many times the Spirit will come to us as the result of the sins of others, which have created the breaches in us, in the preceding verse, the one in Romans we just looked at, we can see that at times the demon has come in as a result of opening a door through our willful cooperation. Now, the temptation may come through a person or media, but we're obviously open to it, so we're meant to be resisting. Now, this happens even though we may be unaware of the spiritual implications at the time. So if we continue using the common, obvious problem of pornography as an example, a person may or may not receive a spirit of lust from a one-time viewing. They may. However, if people have continued and repeated exposure, submitting to the spiritual power behind this particular offence, you can be reasonably sure that they're giving a strong place in their sexuality where a spiritual stronghold will be established and make a home. Now, people who've become bound by this have reported the replay of images and an amplification of their sexual urges and their chemical responses as a result of the thoughts that they're now continually having. And so this is a spirit of lust that is, or should I say, is it a spirit of lust that's brought its nature in, or is it just a generic spirit which now holds a specific area of your being, namely, in this case, your sexuality? Now, again, the scriptures point to the likelihood that it's not the nature of a spirit that has a hold on you. It's rather an area of your own person that's been yielded to the spirit and distorted. And we see this in James 1:14, where it says, "But each one is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and enticed." So it's not the desires of the Spirit. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. So it's a person's own sexuality that is distorted. And when we go beyond the limitations that God put for good, healthy sexual adjustment, then we're opening ourselves to something other than what the Spirit of God would want for us. So now I'm not suggesting for a moment that every time you sin that you're going to receive an evil spirit. But I am proposing that all sin is not from God. So any time that we sin, we are serving Satan. And at times, if this is repetitive or perhaps an emotional breach, this could open us up to demonization. Now, an emotional breach could include an adrenaline rush from high danger activities or horror movies, or excitement from something that we view that is beyond the levels that God intended. So remember, this pushes us past the wholeness and self-control that we would normally have. Remember, in Proverbs, I think it's 25:28. It says, like a city with its walls broken down is a man who lacks self-control. So this is talking about the walls of our personality that give us wholeness and protect us. When they're broken down, say through drugs or alcohol or some other thing that's intensely emotional, then we lose the normal control of our senses that we would have that protect us. All right, so for the most part, the ground for demons entering is prepared and made available in the earlier years of life, from conception to adolescence, up until perhaps we're 10 years old. Now, the lesson here is we can open a door to a spirit by engaging in activities that are beyond God's created order. So once we step outside of his revealed order, we're in trouble. And then we can become entwined with the spirit. And what I mean by that, well, for example, well, let's continue examining sexuality as an easily understood area of our person that can be open to demonic activity through some form of immorality. All right, so once engaged in lustful behavior, the spirit inside has now entwined itself with your sexuality, and you have to some measure become one with it in your thoughts in regards to sexual matters. As a result, the sexual ideas, desires, or tendencies you have are now all influenced by the demon that's inside you. So we could say that it has come in through some kind of breach in the integrity of your person, and now has moved to being integrated or entwined with your sexuality. It's limited in what it can do, but if you're unaware of this influence, then you now think that it's only your thoughts and ideas that move you towards ungodly or more ungodly sexual activities. So you don't hesitate to go ahead with this behavior because you simply think that it's what you alone want. You think it's just your thoughts that you're having, and so you have no problem committing your will to it. The same could be said for, say, retaliatory or revengeful thoughts that you may be having if you, for example, hold unforgiveness. You simply think it's what you want and it's what will please you, and so you don't hesitate to act out further in sin. This could apply to any area of distorted behavior or attitudes that we're in bondage to and that are replayed or amplified as an expression. So we need to discern it by identifying that which is out of order with God's plans for our attitudes and actions. And this is done by measuring these thoughts and deeds by the Word of God and the counsel of the Spirit of God. And John 6:63 says, "It's the Spirit who gives life, the flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit and they are life." All right, so it's often difficult to receive deliverance and separation from an integrated spirit until the person understands to some degree the concept that a part of their thoughts are not actually them. After all, why would you want a part of yourself cast out? But once you see that it's not yourself, now you want it out, and now we're in a position to actually help you get free. Let's propose a case of, say, somebody who's addicted to smoking, or even excessive food intake, or possibly as a form of comfort for inner pain from identity beliefs about yourself. Now they feel prompted to have a cigarette or go to the refrigerator. Now, if they think that this is simply their own thinking, then they won't hesitate to go ahead and act out. But if they realise that it could be a demon or evil spirit within them compelling them to continue in the behaviour that will result in them being robbed of health or even bring on premature death, they may be ready for separation. So knowing that the devil's a liar, a thief and a murderer, he will always be working against you reaching your potential for an abundant life. Now, in regards to the examples that I've used, I would say that in my opinion only a percentage of smokers have a spirit attached to their addiction. Most of the smokers that I know of wish that they could give up, and they only enjoy the occasional one, and this is a strong indicator that their will and thinking is not completely compromised or influenced excessively by a spirit. I have, however, at times heard people say when we're talking about cigarettes, I just love them. And most people would say that they enjoy some of their smokes, but a lot of them are just a habit and they actually aren't necessarily that enjoyable. Now, on more than one occasion when I've heard the I just love them statement, I've commented to the host that maybe they don't love them, and that it's probably a spirit that they're entwined with that loves them, and that this in part is what is speaking out of them, and you can almost hear the mixture of spirit coming out when they're saying, I love them. It's not just simply the person, it's something entwined with the person that loves them. On a couple of occasions, when I've heard this and discerned and believed that it's a spirit saying this, I've offered to cast them out. And each of the times when I've said this, the spirit has risen up in their throats. In every instance, the men have said, when I've said, do you want me to cast it out, even though the spirit's risen up, they're shocked at the revelation that their habit was perhaps spirit-driven, but they've said, not now. Evidently, they needed time to decide whether or not they actually wanted to stop and work out what was what, because till now they thought, no, hang on, this is something I want, so this is a deception in their thinking. And now they need to go away and think about this could be a spirit and decide whether the spirit was a friend or an enemy. God will just, somebody said quite wisely, God will set you free from your enemies, not your friends. Okay, later I know that one of them did give up, others I've not seen again. But in the case of food addictions as a means of comfort, clearly not every time it will be an evil spirit. But if it's extreme, out of control, then it's a possibility that this is a part of the problem, although most likely it'll go along with rejection and other emotional issues, which are the real problem, or the ground, or as we said, even the dung for the spirit. Now, once we've integrated with the spirit, we can use terms such as participating with, or following, or cooperating with the ungodly internal entity. We have to begin by changing our thinking about it in repentance, and then fall out of agreement with working with it as a basis for being set free. Okay, the lesson here is separation begins with seeing and understanding the true source and nature of the problem that you have, and then choosing willfully to be disconnected from it. As we've said again, the main thing we're looking at first is dealing with the ground, and then if we're aware that there's a spirit there, then we will actually deal with it at that time and cast it out. Okay, when we return, we're going to look at demonic involvement in physical problems and also in mental issues that people may have. Okay.